So let's go ahead and get into the topic this week. LA Times, I think, wrongly titled this. I kind of just did the marketing title of Push Comes to Shove, but it's entitled here, This LA Developer Aims to Tear Down Homes to Build Apartments Where the City Doesn't Want Them. And
Yeah,
I
the
think,
LA Times has, as you read through their articles, it's
yeah,
just so glaringly opinionated to me, both in their
right?
titles.
Yeah.
Man, there's, it's just
I don't think
so
that
opinionated.
title is misleading. I don't think it's about
Sure
the
it is.
city.
Yep.
I think it's about the neighborhoods. So anyway, let me go ahead and roll through this. Up in arms over developer Akhilesh Jha's proposal to replace a single-family home with a 7-story apartment complex, neighbors in the Harvard Heights community turned to the city for help. The Los Angeles Planning Commission obliged, ordering Jha to scale down the project. But Jha, a 49-year-old aerospace engineer turned real estate developer, refused. Instead, when he returned to the Planning Commission months later, Jha had added an 8th floor. Wow. He came back with something that was even worse, said Brian Jett, who lives 3 doors down from the proposed development. It's mind-boggling. Jha believed he had the law on his side, and after an hour-and-a-half hearing in February, the Planning Commission agreed. His 33-unit apartment complex was approved unanimously, and Jha hopes to break ground within a year. I'm offended by it, said Samantha Millman, the Planning Commission chair, but I have no choice but to vote for it. Jha is banking his business on moments like these. Jha has spent the last 6 years paging through state laws and city zoning codes. His homework leads him to snap up single-family homes where he decides the law will let him build much bigger, no matter what anyone else thinks. Jha is taking advantage of an opportune moment when California politics are turning away from the slow growth mantra that has dominated in established cities and suburbs over the last half century. In the face of crushing housing affordability crisis and shortage of available homes, state lawmakers have approved more than 100 new laws in 6 years that are designed to incentivize new housing proposals and force local governments to approve them. In
Yeah,
Los
so
Angeles, yeah,
I
go.
want you to pause there, Joe, because I think
Yeah.
that alone is such the context of this article, and it is
Mm-hmm.
coming from top down. I think there's more resistance. The NIMBY approach and perception is so much stronger in the more often in the more strong liberal environments. And particularly in the suburbs adjacent to those, and that's what these are in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
But California is, the state itself is ramming this stuff down the throats of the city.
Right.
There have been a lot of pushback over the years, and the state has come back with more legislation to say you cannot delay this. Not only that, now you need to expedite it, and you
Right.
can't deny
And if you
these.
don't, we will
And if
keep
you,
going with this.
yeah,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
yeah, you cannot come up with more restrictive building elements, and it's exactly kind of what they said. There's been a half century of downzoning and reduction in building, and we'll come up with a summary at the end here. I think there is a
Mm,
basic approach. You have to choose one
right.
side or the other here, but go
Right.
for it. Keep going.
So in Los Angeles, no one is pushing the envelope more than Jha. Besides the 33-unit Harvard Heights project nestled between the 10 freeway and Koreatown, he has 2 proposals in the San Fernando Valley to tear down single-family homes and build dozens of apartments and townhomes on the sites, all efforts that never before would have stood a chance of getting built. Jha's plans are kicking up scorn and anger. Millman, the planning commissioner, called the Harvard Heights building a middle finger to the community, a reference both to the developer's attitude toward his neighbors and the visual of an 89-foot tall structure lording over the 1, 2, and 3-story buildings nearby. Neighborhood leaders in the valley worry that Jha's projects will bring in criminals or ruin the rustic suburban character sustained over decades. While Jha's ideas are far out of scale with nearby properties, he's also not plopping the buildings in the middle of subdivisions. The projects are all within about a half mile of a major freeway, with other multifamily housing and businesses nearby. Jha has already won one court case vindicating his interpretation of city zoning rules and is preparing to go back for more. There will always be conflict, Jha said, but the law is very clear. Resolve that conflict in the best interest of producing the housing. After immigrating to the United States in the 90s, Josh spent 2 decades designing rockets and planes while working for aerospace firms. He married, had a son, and as he entered middle age, decided he wanted to do something new and turned to real estate. At first, Jaw wanted to buy a small apartment complex, but when he was outbid for a property in San Pedro, he thought a better way to make money was to find a house he could tear down and replace with apartments. He had absolutely no construction background. Never ever built a tent in my life, he said. A native Hindi speaker, Jaw armed himself with an English dictionary to help with words he didn't understand while scouring property listings, laws, and zoning codes for places to build. He found the crumbling two-story Victorian in Harvard Heights in the West Adams district for $840,000. The contentious experience galvanized him. He spent a year fighting an effort to make the home a historic landmark. We've talked about that, which would have blocked its redevelopment. After winning, he planned to build a 20-unit apartment complex under a city program that provides incentives for developers near mass transit. But after months of work, he learned that the rules requiring him to have a specifically sized driveway and a room for an electrical transformer didn't leave enough area on the lot to provide sufficiently wide ground floor commercial space. Jaw abandoned his application, but not before he had lost tens of thousands of dollars in permitting fees and design costs, he said. His plans in shambles, Jaw returned to his research and found a state law known as the density bonus. In the simplest terms, the law allows developers to build more dense housing on a lot in exchange for dedicating some of the units for low-income families. Jaw will set aside 3 of his 33 apartments for that purpose. By doing so, Jaw gets to bypass all sorts of city zoning and planning rules. The height of the building will be double what's otherwise allowed. Its width will cover nearly the entire lot, and Jaw only has to provide 20 parking spaces on the site. More important for him, the law says that as long as Jaw testifies these waivers are necessary, the city's hands are tied. The city made me go through hearing after hearing after hearing, Jaw said. Then they would sometimes put a hold on my project because they wanted me to reduce the height. They wanted me to reduce the density, but I stuck to my project and I stuck to the law. Strengthening the density bonus for developers was one of the key changes approved by state legislators in recent years to increase both affordable and overall housing production, said Ben Metcalf, managing director of UC Berkeley's Turner Center for Housing Innovation and former director of the State Department of Housing and Community Development. You can basically choose anything you don't like in the zoning rules, and you get free passes to throw it out the window, Metcalf said. It's kind of an amazing law. Like Jaw, builders across the state have sought to redesign projects by adding low-income and veteran housing, while reducing parking and yard space so they can get their projects approved, even if there's community outcry, Metcalf said. The neighbors have no real leverage anymore, he said. Jaw's proposals have left community members apoplectic. In Woodland Hills, Jaw wants to replace a 4-bedroom home with an apartment complex of 67 units, 7 of which, because of the density bonus and related incentive programs, would be reserved for low-income disabled veterans. Miran Kalajian, vice president of Woodland Hills Warner Center Neighborhood Council, said the development would hurt the area. When you're taking single-family homes and replacing them with big apartment buildings, the residents and the tenants of those apartments are coming from different backgrounds, Kalajian said. The different backgrounds could be criminal backgrounds. It could influence our neighborhoods. Ridiculous. That might be a little too Woodland Hills there. Kalajian, a landlord himself with 7 properties around Woodland Hills, said the community has planned areas for commercial buildings and apartments. Departing from that blueprint, he said, could reduce property values and contribute to a general sense of disorder. So here's the Woodland Hills home. In Selmar, LA's northernmost neighborhood at the foot of San Gabriel Mountains, community leaders believe Jaw's plan to build 40 townhomes on a 1-acre site with single-family home will destroy the area's bucolic atmosphere. The lot zoning requires that there's enough space for horse stables, and townhomes would prevent horse-owning residents from ever living there, said Peter Postmeyer, a member of the neighborhood council. Jaw bought a piece of property and it's zoned for horse keeping, said Postmeyer, adding that there's an extensive trail network the zoning designation aims to protect. He's trying to change that, which is to the detriment of those living near there. Jet and other neighbors in Harvard Heights insist their opposition isn't because they're against housing, rather the specifics of Jaw's project, a 64-unit, 4-story apartment complex for low-income senior citizens opened 2 years ago, across the street with community support, they said. Jaw's design includes a 2-story above-ground parking garage that's so wide, exhaust vents sit less than 10 feet from the small apartments next door. All the negative effects of the development, plus the relatively few low-income units, don't justify its construction. Jett said. We're totally cognizant of the housing crisis and all for affordable housing, said Jett, an independent film director. But this isn't that. Metcalf of UC Berkeley's Turner Center said state lawmakers understood nearby residents might dislike newer, larger projects when they were debating the bills, but they wanted to ensure the neighbors' objections would be less likely to trump housing, especially in areas more primed for growth. Besides the senior housing, multiple other apartment complexes line the block where Jha is proposing to build in Harvard Heights. Abutting the Woodland Hills development is a 3-story commercial structure, and there's a similarly sized apartment building 2 lots down. The Sylmar project sits on a busy street, albeit one with an equestrian crossing road sign, less than 2 blocks from the 210 freeway. In concept, this is what we're wanting to see happen on these 3 sites, Metcalf said. Some of the specifics may be pretty painful to those who live next door. Jha's Sylmar proposal relies on the most aggressive interpretation of state regulations. Originally, he was considering using a new law that allows single-family homeowners to split their lots and build small developments on both. But then he came across a little-known provision in a different set of laws that only apply when the state has not signed off on cities' required growth plans. This provision, known as Builder's Remedy, allows developers to essentially propose constructing whatever they want, provided, again, that they set aside some of the future housing for low-income residents. In this case, it wouldn't matter that the city's zoning otherwise requires space for horse stables. The city of LA was out of compliance with the state planning law only briefly. Jha slipped in his application last June during the 2 weeks between the city council's final adoption of the blueprint and the state accepting it. No one else has proposed a builder's remedy in the city, planning officials said. And because the state now has approved LA's plan, they're no longer allowed. Jha had some help in his fights. A few years ago, he contacted Sonia Traus, one of the progenitors of the YIMBY, or Yes in My Backyard movement, who runs a legal advocacy organization that sues cities for rejecting housing projects. She agreed to fund a lawsuit against Los Angeles in Jha's effort to build in Woodland Hills. Jha won the case last October with an LA County Superior Court judge ordering the city to process his application. Ever since that first connection, YIMBY groups have mobilized behind his projects. While Jha has finished smaller developments around the city, the 3 large efforts have yet to receive their final approval. In the meantime, he rents out his single-family homes to pay the mortgages. He advertises the Woodland Hills house, which has a pool, hot tub, and 4 holes of mini golf on the property for $350 a night on Airbnb. In Harvard Heights, the Victorian has been used for decades as a sober living home. 11 people living on the property now, said Earl Lee, the 76-year-old manager, who's been there since the mid-90s. State and city laws required Jha to offer relocation benefits and housing in his new building to the existing tenants. He said he has no intention of displacing anyone who doesn't want to go. But city officials have questioned Jha's compliance with those laws and have told him to better inform the tenants of their rights. Lee said 8 residents, including him, have expressed interest in coming back to the new development, but the paperwork to prove income and other eligibility requirements to return is burdensome, he said, and some who had wanted to stay already left the home. You can fight it if you want, but most people just look for a different place, Lee said. Jha is pressing ahead with all his plans, even as roadblocks continue. Last month, the city council voted to deny his Sylmar project. Jha went to City Hall to speak at the meeting, reminding city leaders that they'd lost to him in court before. You will lose the case again, Jha said. I'm not going anywhere. Wow. Well, those are the extremes.
Somebody who's done his homework. Look, when the density bonus situation came up at the state level, I believe more than a decade ago, and it's evolved and it's become more loose. It's exactly what we called it. You know, there was too much leeway there. There were too many things that you could just, okay, I'm going to add a few affordable units, and now I can just scrap this, that, and that. It's too big of a pool to choose from. So do I think that pool should be smaller and more manageable? Yeah, I do. And I think some of his projects are a little out of scale. I'm not going to dispute that either. But all these excuses of, you know, crime and out of context with the neighborhood and, you know, changing the energy of our tranquil environment.
Yeah.
You know, this is all the NIMBY stuff that has gotten us where we are in this city. And you just can't have it both ways. That's the bottom line for me at this point. The hypocrisy of We support low income. We want cheap rents, cheaper housing, but I don't want you to build anymore. That doesn't work.
Near me.
And near me, exactly.
Right.
As that
Get
guy
over there.
said, of course, we support it all. We're good people. As long as you don't do it next to me, we're okay with it. Totally the case.
Yeah.
So, in my experience in dealing with development,
Hmm.
there's periodically people that seem irrational, but gosh, I mean, talk about a guy with some gusto who really knew his stuff. A whole community
Yeah.
rejecting it at 7 stories. He came back with 8 stories.
Yeah.
You know, in
Well,
most cases,
he was negotiating for sure. Yeah.
yeah.
Oh,
In most
pretty hard.
cases, you're better off working with a
Yeah.
developer. You can also work to try to reduce the density bonus guidelines and create more restrictions. Some of that's done on the local level for community plans, but then obviously cities
Say that
just
again. No.
because cities have not accommodated for more development. The problem is the people in power are
Mm.
the 50-year NIMBYs. They're in
Yeah.
power. They're in charge, and the neighbors who are the most vocal and in the positions of influence, more often
Yep.
than not, have that long history of not wanting increased density.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
okay.
Well, and then we've mentioned this before too. Politicians are definitely aware that it is more of a renter's city now, and they want to keep those people happy as well. So that's another change in the city from
And
the
in
past.
so doing, they've got to support more density.
Yeah.
What was interesting to me, I looked at this article and I thought, well, there's obviously been conversations about displacement for lower income people for a long time in this city because prices have changed so rapidly and rents have changed so rapidly.
Right.
Um, but this is an element of displacement for NIMBYs. You know, if this is
Hmm.
going to happen and your neighborhoods are going to get denser and busier, it's no different. Everything's changing. And it's not the what I want. So what do you do? There's always this sense of this is my neighborhood. I've lived here for so long. Well,
Yeah.
is it matching the times? Maybe you can find another neighborhood that's the way you want it to be.
Yeah.
But people always just want to fight to keep what exists.
Yeah. Well,
So
it's interesting you say that because it's also about, not just homeowners, but renters in those areas might be against this because it's going to raise their rents at some point.
well,
With the
it,
new residents coming in and new building,
it
it's
often
raising their rent
doesn't
at
raise the
some point.
rents.
It does not. Okay.
It does not. The newer buildings coming in are going to get the premium rent.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what you're going to rely on is more competition, more volume now. And it's not one building that's going to do this. It's going to take many, many,
Right.
many. But there's just more inventory, which creates more competition. But then also the
So you think
older
it'll flatten it
buildings.
out?
The
Yeah.
older buildings then become uh, more reasonably priced because people might seek
Got
the
it.
newer spaces.
Got it.
Um,
Okay.
so
So it
there ends up
equalizes
being
out a bit.
it does. There ends up being pressure somewhere, and the argument often is that these newer buildings being built are all high-end, high-priced market
Hmm.
rates. There is absolutely no way to avoid that unless
Right.
it's government subsidized to build it.
Right.
No way to
Right.
avoid it, and you're just going to rely on other inventory then to become the price to come down a little bit or to stabilize and not rise any further for other
Got it.
inventory. No developer is going to go in and say, "I want to lose money. Let me build something and charge a small amount."
Right. It's what it is. Yeah. Push comes to shove.